morning. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming and joining this talk. My name is Amin. I am part of our professional service system in the APAC region, and I'm super glad to be here and presenting one of our DevDay talks. So I had some learnings working with our customers in the region for the last 6 years, working with Auth0/Okta. And here I'm mostly to talk about those experiences with you guys. Developers and customers love Auth0 because it's so configurable, right? You can take it, use our extensibility points and configuration to shape up Auth0 the way you want. But obviously, with more configuration means there is more nuances that can customers be mindful of. So that's where our shared responsibility model kicks in. We, as the platform providers, we do our best to secure access to our servers and APIs. Customers at the same time are responsible for configuring their tenant to the level of security that is expected from their business. So I'm going to go through some of the highlights and the findings that I've seen with other customers. Sometimes they get not optimal settings in their tenants. I'm going to share it with you here, these highlights. And if you go through this talk with me and you don't see any of these applicable to your environments, fantastic, pat yourself in the back. But my guess is that most customers here or watching online later at least will find 1 or 2 items that they can improve in their setup. No security talk is complete without this disclaimer. What we're going to go through here is generic. It's not tailored for any customer. Please talk to your own security team and professionals before implementing the recommendations that we are discussing here. For the agenda today, I'm going to have categorized my slides into 3 areas. I'm going to talk about the administration piece, which is mostly configuration that you do in the managed dashboard of Auth0. Then we're going to deep dive a little bit to the development and talk about how to configure your resource servers, your relying party applications, and your extensibility code that you write inside Auth0 to be optimal in terms of security. And we also talk a little bit about the infrastructure setup and mostly custom domain setup that you do in Auth0. And this is going to be an advanced talk. So we, after several types iterations of trimming this is still lots of slides to fit in half an hour. So I'm going to push the throttle and go fast. But if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I'm going to be available in the speaker area in level 5 after this talk. So any questions, please let's discuss it there. So Auth0 administration. Very first thing, you have to be across and mindful who has access to your management dashboards. You have to go to your tenants, go to your team members, and see who are the people listed there at your tenant members. And it is not uncommon to me to come across customers that they have people there listed as tenant members that are not no longer with the business, but they're still admin dashboard of their management dashboard. It's a sign of poor governance, obviously. But the way we can solve this is today you can raise a support ticket that access to my management dashboard is only through the federation to my workforce. That's fantastic. We're working to make that self-service for you guys to make it easier to add a federated management dashboard. So when people leave your business, they also don't have access to the management dashboard anymore. The other thing that you can do as a stopgap is to at least enable MFA. If there are people coming in as management dashboard to your with the credentials or from their social logins, enable the MFA for them. And if you're adding tenant members, don't just go in full on with the admin. Maybe list privilege rule. Try to add them with the bare minimum that they need. Like if you have customer support team that they need to access users and reset their MFA or password, maybe only write access to the users enough. Or if you have developers that they need to raise support tickets, only support access is enough for them. And ultimately, make sure which are the tenants that you have in your subscription. Again, I come across customers that they're listed that they have no idea who's provisioned this, who is owning this. So go to support.auth0.com, select your subscription, and see all the tenants that are listed there. have a cadence of doing this to make sure all your tenant members and tenants are what you expect. And tag them correctly. Again, I come across customers that they're not aware of, they haven't tagged the tenants correctly. We give you 3 levels of tagging: dev, staging, and production. This should mirror your setup that you have in your SDLC lifecycle. And these taggings or environment tags are there to enforce rate limits, so you don't shoot yourself in the foot by sending too much traffic from dev or staging environments. But I'll definitely changing this in the middle of a deployment. You might go to a different environment tag and then be rate limited. So assign them correctly the way they mirrored your SDLC lifecycle. The other thing that we have, and most customers are not aware, it's a very good tool, is our readiness checks. So you can run your readiness checks from your tenant management dashboard or from the support center. You can go to a tenant and run the production checks or readiness checks. This comes with a list of the recommendations from Auth0, the things that you must do, the best practices and recommendations. So we're adding more and more checks as we go. So it's good also to have a cadence of coming back and running this regularly, because there will be more checks added later, and also see if there's anything that you can improve from the readiness checks that is reported back to you. Tenant has a tenant advanced settings section. There's a lot of content in the advanced settings. I'm not going to go through all of that, and depending on when you have provisioned your tenant, you may see some of these settings or not. But I'm going to go again some highlights. So make sure that the way you have managed and you've configured your session obviously respects the expectation from the business in terms of sessions, maximum lifetime, and sessions inactivity. You would like to, again, most customers, you would like to disable the dynamic client registration, and you would like to disable application connections flag as well. I have another slide talking about this one in detail, so I'll go through that. You want to use generic responses as much as possible. You want to also enable email verification for ADFS and Azure AD users. Again, I have another slide to go more in detail about this one. If there's any legacy flows, if you don't need them, disable them. And of a click hijacking, again, do not disable click hijacking protection that Auth0 is coming with. That prevents from your login page being iframed. Like last year I had a talk just about this one, that how attackers can use iframe to host your login page and then take the credentials and click jacking from there. Cool. Talking about application connections. So what that means, if you go through the applications, you can see a list of the connections that the application can authenticate with that. And the same thing, you can go to the connection and see the applications that are listed there to authenticate against that. And especially for customers that have, they have a customized universal login, the fact that you don't see a connection in your universal login doesn't mean that it's not enabled. A malicious actor and attacker can always come back and send the connection parameter to target one of the connections that you might have still enabled. Again, like I've seen customers that they have, like, let's say, internal application, it's going to only authenticate with their workforce identity, but the social connection or customer's connection is enabled, and I can pass the connection parameter and get access to the application. What makes it more easier for attackers to leverage that is this flag that we have, enable application connection. It's a dangerous flag, don't enable it. What that flag does, when you add a new application, it goes and it enables it against all connections. It's great for development environment, less hassle for developers to test applications, but it's not suitable for production environment. Disable that and manage your application connection metrics by your CI/CD pipeline, right? Which is a good saver to my next slide, which is use CI/CD to manage Auth0. Don't go to the management dashboard. In an ideal world, you don't need to go to the management dashboard at all. You just have to provision everything through CI/CD. And if you're going to the management dashboard, there's a human factor. Things can go wrong, people click on the wrong spot, and all of a sudden you have an incident. We give you two excellent tools. There is a deploy CLI, Auth0 deploy CLI. It's a simple Node.js-based application. Anyone with Node.js skills can use it or extend it, and it can provision your tenant. My go-to is Auth0 Terraform provider. It just fits in perfectly with your existing Terraform if you have the skills in-house, and Auth0 becomes another part of your infrastructure with the Terraform. The question I get asked is, customer, hey, I would like to do CI/CD, but I'm a little bit late to the game. I already have a tenant configured. What can I do? Good news is both these tools, like they give you like with the deploy CLI, you can export and then import, so it allows you to start wherever you want. With the Terraform, we have Auth0 CLI. It's a different tool, but it has multiple commands. One of them is a Terraform generate that you can use to point it to a tenant. Like Terraformer, it's going to generate Terraform configuration, and from there you can start your Terraform journey and configure the rest with Auth0. So far we talked about tenant. I'm going to have 3 slides for application hygiene inside the tenants. So the first things is to make sure you have correct, callback URLs, all the URLs that you allow list for logout, cross-origin calls, and for callback, they should point to the correct environment. Your production, in your dev. No custom domains that you don't have control of that, like someone pointing to a subdomain in Heroku that developer might leave, but they still have a URL, allowed URL in your production environment to receive the authorization codes. And if you use refresh tokens, customize your refresh token maximum lifetime and rotation, and also the inactivity timeout, that again similar to our tenants configuration in terms of their session lifetime. This should represent what the business expectations are there. One flag that we shipped recently, most customers are not aware, is that you can now disable cross-origin authentication, which should be the case for majority of customers. So disable cross-origin authentication, you probably don't need that, and just simplifies another attack vector and removes it from the equation. Second application hygiene is about the grants. So again, the least privilege rules applies here. Minimize the grants that you have enabled against an application. You don't want grants that you don't use. And in particular, there are 2 grants, implicit and resource owner password grant, that are removed from the OAuth 2.1. They're considered legacy. No new applications you're developing should really need these. And there are also legacy legacy grants from the past that Auth0 had its own resource owner grants and whatnot, so remove those legacy grants as well. And ultimately about the confidentiality of the application. So application you configure, we have all the way from public clients or non-confidential, suitable for single page applications and native applications, all the way to confidential applications in your server side. And surprising, but I come across customers that they're using confidential client in the non-confidential environment. There's a client secret in their single page application, or vice versa. They have a regular web application that's configured as a public client. So get the credentials right, so you can go all the way from none. Then you can send as a post payload for a symmetric client secret, or as HTTP header. And now we have the asymmetric client credential with the private key jot. So you can actually add multiple of these private key jots, and private key sits with you, public key sits with us. So it's asymmetric. We don't need to know the private key. And it's also 0 downtime rotation. So because you have more than one, you can rotate the private key in its own cadence. So management API is also important. So management API give access to what you can do against Auth0 tenant through API. It's super powerful, so be mindful. If an application needs, only give it the minimum number of the scopes that they need to call Auth0 management API. And some of these, like, it has a cascading effect. For example, if you have update client grants, they can go back and update, application can go back and update its own grants or other application grants, so they can gain more power over time. So limit especially these powerful scopes. One thing that we have, again, suitable for development environment, not suitable for production, is this API Explorer. So you go to the Management API, you go to the API Explorer tab, you can provision, when you click and enable it, you provision an app that has access to all Management API. Super powerful and very handy if you want to copy paste this access token to our documentations, which are interactive. From there you can test and call our Management API, but not good for production. So I can see developers in production, they just copy paste this token everywhere. If pasted in the wrong hands, in the wrong place, it can end up in wrong hands, and off you go, you have an incident. So don't enable API Explorer in a production environment. Talking about Management API and the things that they can do, another thing is that a good percentage of customers don't get right is this application and user metadata. So metadata is against the user. You can store the user metadata, which is great for the information that the user can update. Cosmetic details such as their preferred language or the color schemes, whatnot, that they can update. And the app metadata, which is they only have read access to, like they cannot update. This is like confidential important information such as who this user is pointing to in your CRM system. So when the user logs in, you get them their CRM user ID and attach it to the ID token so the application knows which user this one is. And I see customers store everything, unfortunately, on their user metadata. That is, recipe for disaster, and tell me, hey, nothing has ever gone wrong. What's the problem with that? How an attacker can, and then I have to show them how things can go wrong. You can go to the Management API, set the audience as Management API with the update current user metadata. That will give you an access token with the update current user metadata, and from there you can call over patch user endpoint that goes and updates the metadata. So an attacker can come as himself, get this access token, update the user metadata, point to someone else, log out and log back, and there we have account takeover. And enable log streaming, like my last slide for management dashboard configuration. Your logs are not going to stay in Auth0 forever. Depending on your subscription you have with us, maximum lifetime is 30 days. So after 30 days, the logs are rotated. You don't have access to them. If you don't ship the logs outside to your own central logging system, you will not have the ability to go back and see what happened. So an attacker, again, can leverage this. They can do a sticky operation, wait for a few days for the logs to disappear and take the next step. And you don't have the forensics ability to go back and track it. So to have the upper hand, basically have the logs in one central place. Let's change the gears to development, the things that you have to be mindful. Best practice, split the application by their use case. If you have one application for different platform, iOS, Android, in a single page app, or it's doing the machine-to-machine calls as well, split them. This gives you basically two benefits. First, you can see the traffic, which application adoption for different applications, but it allows you to minimize the grants and callback URLs per application. Use Pixie, right? Use and force in Pixie. As a part of 2.1 or 2.1, Pixie is mandatory for all the authorization code flows. And what is Pixie? Let's do a refresher. Pixie is a protection against taking the authorization code and exchange it against somewhere else, intercepting the authorization code. And if you look at the authorization request, we can send the code challenge, and that code challenge is basically a hash of a code verifier, and that only application knows. And today, unfortunately, we don't have a way to configurably only force Pixie for application, but you have a workaround, which is using our extensibility points, and you can write an action that checks if you're running on Pixie or not. So make sure your applications are configured to be in Pixie, and to prevent an attacker to downgrade from Pixie into normal authorization code flow, have this piece of code that checks. If you're not gonna Pixie, it's gonna throw an exception and bail out of the authorization transaction. Account linking is another thing that customers get wrong. If we give you an API, you can write a rule or action that you have a primary user, a secondary user, call Management API to link them together and say, hey, who is the primary user at the end of your rules execution that, or actions again, very soon you will have the same functionality in actions that says who is the sub claim that I'm going to return in action, in ID token or access token. So great. This is one of the features that developers love us because you can take multiple identity and links them together. However, you have to be mindful before going to next slide that the two identities that you link here are basically the same person. If you're, for example, using their mailbox, it's to match them, check the email that they match them, and then link them, make sure that that email is verified. That indicates they're the same person. So linking two identities that they're not verified to be the same person, it can result in account takeover. One of the reasons that could happen is that we have social connections that they do not verify the email, or they do not verify the email immediately. Like there is like a 2 weeks of window that you can go in. Like I can go in as an Amin at Gmail, I have a credential-based account. You have Spotify, Spotify is not going to verify your email. So you coming from Spotify, attacker goes and creates Amin at Gmail. Spotify comes in, gets account link and account takeover, right? And not only social connections, they can come from Azure as well, and they can come from ADFS as well. So that's why for that particular one, we have actually a flag when you log in for the first time, we send you an OTP code to your mailbox. This functionality could be extended to other connections in future, but at the moment that is a kind of must-have if you're using Azure AD and ADFS connections. And for management API calls, like avoid excessive management API calls. Like it is a limited resource, but some customers use it as it's unlimited. Like depending on your subscription or your environment tag that you have different level of rate limits for management API, rate limits per second, per endpoint, and per minute. If you're in the private cloud, about half of the RPS that you have on your private cloud is dedicated for management API as well. But if you go over these numbers, it's a hard limit. Like you're going to get 429 and you're going to be having an outage. So control the user flows that especially users can trigger management API call and avoid them to be able to exhaust the rate limit that you have for management API call. In general, for any, like if you do anything that is costly, such as sending an SMS or any API calls that's commercial, an attacker can come in and create a commercial damage at least for you. So avoid paid calls or excessive management API calls. The other thing, like unsafe MFA skips, you can do silent authentication and knife frame and to get a new access token. So it is not uncommon to come across, even after all the communication we have with customers, don't do this, but they still do this. So they write a piece of code. If I'm running in prompt none or respond with web message, within the case I'm doing a silent authentication, avoid MFA. So anyone can pass a query parameter as prompt none or web message response mode, so you cannot trust that. The correct way to do this in the rules or action, we have a context authentications or event authentication that gives you a list of the authentication methods that they have done and their timestamp. So you'll have to look at that and decide based on the timestamp and the list of the authentication they have done, should they be MFA challenged or not. Another dev maybe practice that I see, and it's not a best practice, is to redirect from the rules as a means to fail the transaction. Redirection doesn't fail the transaction. So the customer redirect will say, I want the user to send it my own customized, let's say, error page, right? They do this kind of code that they have, hey, send user to HTTP bin, like email is not verified, and this piece of code, make sure that you access the application only if your email is verified. So what happens is we redirect there, but we also send that state parameter that allows you to come back and resume your transaction through rules or actions. An attacker can easily take that and go to the continue endpoint with the same state and then resume the transaction that will run the rest of the rules and actions. So my rule was to avoid unverified email addresses or whatever roles that you have for a particular user to access a particular application. I managed to bypass that, and email verified is false, but I still got access to the application. The correct way to do this is to use access API deny that will terminate the transaction and terminate the session as well. M2M grant types, another thing that can go wrong, and this is again very common to happen. Like you have, let's say you have a backend list of the APIs with a set of scopes that you can have an application, and then you go and grant those scopes to the application for machine-to-machine application. These are preset, happy days, everything all right. But as a resource owner, I can also come and ask for the same audience and the same scopes as your management. And again, today in Auth0, we're not going to stop you. We're going to issue for access token as a resource owner. And if you look at the two access tokens that are generated, they look pretty much the same. Like if you look at the issuer, same audience, and same scope. And that's where majority of API gateways and access control, they stop. They say, hey, I'm going to check the scope, audiences, and issuer. Off you go. You can call the API. However, to make sure it's a machine-to-machine, you have to go a little bit further, check the GTY claim, that is the token is issued over client credential grants, or the sub should end with @signed clients. In general, have a code quality, good code quality for your extensibility points. Define HTTP timeout for when you're calling an endpoint, your extensibility point is calling an enabler outside Auth0. Make sure there's a timeout. Most of the Node.js libraries, they don't have a default timeout. They're going to wait there forever. And our rules and actions, they time out after 20 seconds. So don't store secrets in the code. Rules and actions, they both have secret management capacity. Use that. Catch all the exceptions. Make sure that it's all exceptions are managed. And return callback. Customers forget. There's like execution paths that they don't execute callback for rules and hooks. And custom DB, again, we're going to wait there forever until you call the callback, and the transaction will time out. Link the code, type checking, async, await. Write unit tests for your extensibility coins. Cache if you have any expensive operations, results. Your dependencies in the actions should also review them and use the most up-to-date version of the libraries without vulnerabilities or without known vulnerabilities. And target the last compatible environment. Like again, depending on when you provision your tenant, you might have a choice of Node.js 12, 16, or 18. If your application is compatible, it's always a good practice to run the latest version of the runtime. With that, let's talk quickly about the infrastructure setup. So for the customers that creating their own self-managed custom domain name, we give you two things: a CNAME API key and an edge location. So you have to send the traffic, obviously, to the edge location with the CNAME API key header attached as a HTTP header. And what that does, ultimately you get an access token or ID token with the issuer pointed to your custom domain, which is the correct way of doing it. Again, customers, I've seen this, they send the traffic to canonical domain name, and that will issue a token. We're not going to stop you. If the CNAME API key is incorrect, we're going to stop you. But if you send the traffic to canonical domain name, it's internet accessible. You can obviously do that. But that will give you a token with the issuer of the canonical domain name. And then if you're matching against the canonical domain name, it obviously gives the opportunity for an attacker to bypass your, whatever you've put in front of the customer, your VAF and your IP, allow list and deny it. They can bypass. They can always go to the canonical domain name to authenticate. And extra protection for make sure that traffic is coming after they go through your VAF setup. And make sure the client IP that Auth0 sees is actually correct. So if you're setting up a custom domain in front of us and you follow the guidelines that we have, most of the time the IP that we see is correct if you follow it. But again, customers that I've seen, they've configured their own reverse proxy in front of Auth0, but the client IP that we see is not correct. So we allow you to define what is the HTTP header that will carry the client's IP to us, right? We have a bunch of possible values. Look at the Auth0 logs to see the IP that we report against the real IP of the client and make sure they are the same. This allows us to do the correct rate limit and attack protection against the client's real IP as opposed to your own servers. And if you're sending traffic from backend to our authentication API, there is this flag trust token endpoint IP header. Again, some customers don't know about it. It allows you to send the traffic to us from your own backend servers and send the client's IP as an Auth0 forward 4 header. That again, you have to send this IP so we do the correct rate limiting and attack protection against the client's real IP. Last slide, you enable the attack protection, have all of them enabled. You're paying for Auth0 because of this feature, so enable them. But all of these have an allow list that allows you to define, these are a list of my own server IPs. Do not do attack protection against those server IPs. If in case something goes wrong with the previous slide, we are not seeing the correct IP of the client, at least for a duration, this is the second line of defense. You have your IPs listed there that will allow, which will stop Auth0 from going back and rate limiting and brute force attack prevention from your own IPs. Thanks a lot for joining this session.